Hi all, I'm going to have a look now at one of my losses. This was against A.Stone in the Barnet Congress, which I played in. This is in round 4. So I was black against Stone, who was the top seed of the tournament, and higher graded than me. He's about 195 or 199, is it? Anyway, after d4, knight f6, he played his favourite Trompowsky. And I played a system which I was comfortable with, which I played before against him in the Barnet Congress last year, actually, where we jointly won it last year. So I thought I'd repeat it. But last year I had a very exciting idea, which I think I was a little bit too tired to sort of try and reuse in this game. After f3, knight f6, I think black's already got a nice position here. It's a nice, simple anti-Trompowsky system. Where black's just trying to have a kind of French defence, but with the bishop outside of the pawn chain. So after g4, bishop g6, h4, this has all been played before this kind of thing. There was this game, Grandmaster Julian Hodgson versus John Nunn, and Nunn had played something like h5 here and just swung the knight back to d7. But in that game, a bishop exchange occurred on d3, and then Nunn played g6 and bishop g7. Instead here, Andrew played c4, and really I should have more carefully considered now just trying to keep the pawn structure fluid, because by not keeping it fluid I might have these permanent liabilities on the dark squares like e5. I went for a fixed pawn structure here, which is a bit too passive. I think one of the reasons, because I got up too early, I'll explain why in a later video, I played c6, which was a little bit too passive. If Rybka suggests just taking here, believe it or not, because the idea is that after bishop takes c4, although white would get a lead in development temporarily, black's got a lot freer development now if he does this knight c6 now, with the idea of quick e5, which white can't really do anything about. So it wouldn't even be a pawn sacrifice. Last year I'd played an e5 as a pawn sacrifice. So let's have a look at it here. Knight e2, for example, e5, and Rybka thinks black's already better, and it does seem to be a very free game for black. So in the game, I didn't really even consider just taking it and going for e5. One thing which I did have a look at this, just e5 here. But I thought he'd have a strong pressure, on the D line, on the D file. Let's say if knight c6 here as a pawn sack, I mean, this might be okay as well as a temporary pawn sack. Let's say knight c3, knight d takes e5, and black's okay here. So, yeah, even as a pawn sack it would have been okay here, e5 perhaps. So de, knight c6, and black's fine. So the way I played it was extremely passive. So sometimes it's worth sacrificing a lead in developments, even to be even less in development terms, because now this fixed pawn structure after the exchange of light squared bishops, just white's better now. It's just got a slight edge, and king f2 is quite a logical move. I know it looks really strange, but it's perfectly okay there, the king. So after knight b6, I had a vague idea that the c4 could be important, but he snuffed all that out just by playing b3. It's not really a big deal. And now after g6, I was hoping that I'd play bishop g7 and have a very comfortable game later. Rook c8's, knight b4's even later, just queenside counterplay. But after bishop e5, I radically altered the game now with knight takes e5, which I think is a bad strategic mistake. I think maybe just rook g8 here, and if f4, maybe something like this. But even so, it would be better for whiteness, because look at that d4 square. It can be used strategically, and he's got a nice clamp on f6. So this kind of line wouldn't be that good either. So after bishop e5, my position starts going a bit wrong. So let's see why. After knight takes, d takes, white's got a brilliant clamp on f6, which unfortunately I also made the situation a lot worse now. So this pressure on c4 is nothing really, but he played now knight e4, and I really shouldn't have allowed this pawn fawn on f6. That really signals the end of the game. I should have just taken on e4 now, and so just leave this queen to invade and even snap up some pawns. For example, bishop d2 here would have been quite dangerous for white. So say in this position where I've sacked 2 pawns, but I've got a lot of pressure now, and rook e3 would be a mistake here, but instead just rook fd8, and black is better according to Ripper, getting back this e3, and then white would be slightly exposed. Let's have an example. So this will be perfectly okay for me, this kind of position, better for black. So anyway, after knight e4, I made the situation worse by allowing this fawn pawn on f6, and after that it was a straight road to victory almost, because of this rook g1 threatening rook g6. So for some reason I thought optimistically that he wouldn't do an exchange sack, but he did, because otherwise knight e4 and I'm neutralising the pressure. He sacked the exchange, an intermediate rook c1, and a knight d4, which also has menacing threats now of knight takes e6. So really it's all over. I'm getting hacked here, unfortunately. Anyway, so I'm material down now in this lost queen and rook ending. I try and desperately gain some counterplay, but he snuffs it out now with e6, and there's also threatening things like queen g5. Actually, this wasn't the position. The king was actually on h6, but anyway, this ending was lost. This transposes into the same position for the ending, where I'm tied down to this f7 pawn, and his king just comes in now, invades, and I do this last little trick to try and get my king to f5, but it's a bit hopeless because of this e6 pawn sack, and then rook g7, and he's winning, because if king f5 then f7 queening. So anyway, it was an instructive game. Let's have a quick overview and summary. So Trompowsky, one of my favourite systems now against it, with this just the early knight e4 and just bishop f5. But here I should have really strongly considered just taking the pawn to play for a quick e5, so I don't have any responsibilities with the d pawn, just losing that responsibility, a bit like a queen's gamut accepted, and then playing for a quick counterpunch in the centre. So that would have exposed perhaps some of these potential weaknesses, with this f3 on this diagonal later. So this would have been fine for black. This kind of variation would be very nice, very open, and black's got a lot of piece pressure. So instead I played a very, very passive continuation with c6, and the fixed pawn structure was lovely for white, just to play later this bishop e5. So he's spreading, he's getting into this f6 area, and also he's vacating that d4 for a lovely knight. So this is a case where this dark squared bishop is going to be hopeless. It's already biting on granite with these two, if it ever goes there. But, white's knights dominate the position now, which is quite instructive. But here, with my last chance to gain some counterplay with d takes e4, but for some reason, he spent such a long time on knight e4, I started to trust his analysis. I shouldn't have. I should have just gone for a very dynamic line, just sacrificing 2 pawns here. If I just taken here, sacrificed both pawns, I would have had some counter pressure finally on e3. My king would have been totally safe. So anyway, not rook takes e3 here though, because here queen d4 would be strong. But just in this position, if I had seen all this, then rook fd8, and then getting the pawn back. Anyway, so in the game, after I played another passive move, my fate was sealed with this g-file attack combined with this knight e6. So it was a bit of a sad ending with this rook and pawning. My king completely tied in, my rook tied to the fence, and his king was able to just improve the position. So Anyway, he's a very good player to lose to, higher grade than me, so it's really no great shame. I think the important thing is to learn from the losses, and so you don't try and make the same sort of mistakes the next time. Thanks very much. Please leave any comments on YouTube.